we have been talking about this particular thing on the Free Press, and I would recommend, because I'm promoting myself here, that you go back and listen to an episode of Honestly that I did with Walter Kern's podcast partner, Matt Taibbi, on this issue. And we were anticipating it then. And on Saturday, it happened. The Brazilian Supreme Court suspended X, formerly known as Twitter, and CEO Elon Musk said, I am not going to play ball with this. The judge, who is a very powerful figure in Brazil, then started going after Starlink. And Elon says, this is a separate company. You cannot do this. But at the same time, the Lula da Silva's, the president of Brazil, his party was tweeting after the ban. They were tweeting random things about their political positions, which I thought was kind of funny. And this is what Elon Musk posted on Saturday, the day of the ban, after the ban. And if you can see that on your screen, ladies and gentlemen, it is it's balls, actually. It's just a dog's bollocks, as they say. So if this is the thing that how they try to enforce this, if Brazilian users can very easily circumvent this ban by using a VPN, as I recommend they do, they can be fined $9,000 a day. And our friend Glenn Greenwald, who we disagree with on a lot of things, but he is a friend of this show, and he has been posting from behind a VPN and saying, come get me. So we obviously here in the United States have free speech rights enshrined in the Constitution. Thank God so many other countries don't. But a bunch of Americans, weirdly, not so weirdly, are siding with the Brazilian government. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison seems to think this is a good thing. And this is what Ellison tweeted. Thank you. I'm not going to try the Brazilian here. The Portuguese here. Obrigado, Brazil. Thank you, Brazil, for taking X offline. Guys.
On X.
On X. He says it on X. Who's going to first person to point that out? It was Eli. You win that contest, Eli, so I go to you. I don't know how closely you've been following this, but a lot of this stemmed from having a representative inside the country. And it's really about this judge. And the interesting thing, and I talked about this with Matt Taibbi, is this is, of course, framed as a battle against what, ladies and gentlemen? Misinformation. And we can't allow that. And who decides what's misinformation is this Lula-friendly judge who has been running rampant. And there's a great article in the New York Times about him and all the things that he has done to crack down on free speech in Brazil. Eli, what do you make of this stuff?
Well, I would just say that I'm glad you brought up Keith Ellison, because there's a problem inside of the Republic. I mean, this is coming here if we don't stop certain people or a second of the Democratic Party. I remember still Kamala Harris herself in 2019 ran on the promise to take Trump off of Twitter. There was celebration at the old Twitter when Trump was finally kicked off of Twitter on, I think, January 7th. Not to mention the endless hearings that we saw led by Democrats like Adam Schiff, who were demanding more censorship of social media to fight, you guessed it, misinformation, disinformation, and so forth. It would be funny if it wasn't such a huge danger. But Eli, this is a real problem.
Eli, Tim Waltz said something similar about free speech, hate speech and free speech. And before I throw to Walter, I want to rile him up a little bit and show this clip of Kamala Harris in what she said back in 2019 about free speech and social media.
Will hold social media platforms accountable for the hate infiltrating their platforms, because they have a responsibility to help fight against this threat to our democracy. And if you profit off of hate, if you act as a megaphone for misinformation or cyber warfare, if you don't police your platforms, we are going to hold you accountable as a community.
As a community. I don't know what that means, Walter Kern. I don't think I like the sound of it, though. What do you make of it?
It's the new version of collective guilt. It's called viral guilt. Guilt by association, guilt by being on the platform at all, guilt by retweeting, guilt by liking. It's a threat to, as she said, a group, not just an individual. See, at that point, they didn't have Elon Trump, right? I mean, Elon Trump, Elon Musk to kick around, right? It hadn't been personified yet, this battle. And so it was the community that was in the crosshairs. Now they've, targeted it and got their Emmanuel Goldstein, their object of hate, and that's Elon Musk. They aim it at him. So it was a little bit more sophisticated then. But I will say with Eli, I wanted to say while he was speaking, nodding intensifies. Absolutely, this is a threat here. And it's not just Brazil. Brazil is only the latest. We remember when the commissioner of the EU wrote Musk on the eve of his Trump interview and said, if we deem this misinformation, you're in trouble, sir. Exactly. Yeah, hands in the air. We couldn't agree more. And so this has been from Britain to the EU to Brazil and other places, a sort of noose that's tightening. And the United States sits still in the middle without contact with the noose. It hasn't quite touched our necks yet. But all this, all the trends look bad.
Batya. I wanted to read this quote to you. This is the Tim Walz quote. There's no guarantee. A lot of you have seen this clip, and we didn't pull it because he's only the VP nominee. So there's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy. Now, for a teacher, that is a sentence that doesn't make a hell of a lot of grammatical sense. But let's forget about that and say, is this something like Walter and Eli worry about that you worry about too, Batya, that people, have a kind of a different attitude about free speech these days?
I'm really glad you read the Tim Walz quote, because I'm about to defend Harris, the United States, and Brazil, but I can't defend that. So I'm really glad that you gave me that lifeline.
I tried to throw you a lifeline, yeah.
So everyone here knows I'm a human, and that I'm taking this on with a sort of, I'm shaking, especially before Walter, who's such a hero on this front. But all right, so I think that what Tim Walz said was totally unconstitutional and inexcusable. And yes, does reflect a worrying trend among American, liberals or erstwhile liberals who really do seem to have given up on the belief in free speech, to my mind, in their desperate attempt to be relevant with young people who don't believe in free speech. And there's this weird thing on the left where they're just desperate to be cool with young people that I find like so alienating. But the way that I interpreted the Harris quote was not when she said we're going to hold them accountable as a community, meaning we're going to hold the owners and the platforms accountable as a community of platforms, but rather what she meant was, the most generous interpretation is what she meant was a consumer boycott, that as a community of users of these platforms, we will hold them accountable by not using them anymore, which to me is the kind of thing that what is more American than a boycott, right? We like a consumer boycott is the opposite of government intervention. So that's I think the kind of generous interpretation of what she said. To my mind, there has been worrying stuff happening here. Zuckerberg admitting that he caved to pressure from the government, right? Really, really bad. But when I look at that in comparison to Brazil just literally banning it, there is still that moment where Zuckerberg could have said no, right? And I think that the Supreme Court case hung on this, right? Like how much pressure was implied, how much punishment was implied from the government. And I don't like it. I'm not defending it. But what I'm saying is I do think that there is a world of difference between that and Brazil. And even in Brazil, like I'm a person who thinks we should ban TikTok because I think TikTok is a threat to our national security and to the health of our young people. You know, I don't think that the Chinese Communist Party has a free speech right to own a platform in the United States that 150 million Americans use. And so to me, Brazil saying, look, the United States does not have free speech rights to have a private company in Brazil. Like, would I rather they had Twitter? Sure. Do I think the rationale for banning it of using misinformation sucks because obviously they're just going to use their biases to define what counts as misinformation? Yes. But I do think that it's maybe not quite as draconian as the most draconian interpretation of it. Okay, guys, rip me a new one. I'm ready for it.
Well, let's say I'm in a line of people who are about to be machine gunned, okay? And they machine gun the person to my right and then the person to my left. Well, compared to them, I'm in great shape, right? So the U.S. is in great shape right now compared to the people around it. Number two, if that was the only comment you'd ever seen Kamala Harris make on the subject, I can understand your generosity. And in fact, I think you may be right. I think she may be saying to the audience, we as a community are going to boycott. I think that's a good point. But she's got many other moments on this subject. And in one that I just watched today, she talked about, and it was also from 2019, doubling the Justice Department. It might have been the same speech, task forces, going after these places. She did an interview with Jake Tapper that's circulated quite a lot recently, in which she reiterated her feeling that that Donald Trump had lost his privileges, she said, suggesting that her view of the First Amendment is that it grants privileges to the people rather than rights. All in all, though, if you take the totality of the statements from Harris, Waltz, the actions of the Biden administration, and remember COVID, you have to have been around during COVID. My friend Matt Taibbi, when he went through the Twitter files, he saw all kinds of suppression of speech, and it went to all kinds of issues. But it also went to particular individuals who were trying to talk about COVID, who were experts in the field, like Jay Bhattacharya, and and Robert F. Kennedy, and others. And so you have to look at the whole picture. And I think it's whistling past the graveyard to think, well, the person to the left of me is dead and the person to the right of me is dead, but look at me, I'm still standing.
Yeah. And I would just add one more thing. Behind this notion that the government must protect its citizens from disinformation and misinformation is a fundamental, I'd say, abrogation of what makes a free. It's we don't trust you to understand information in your reality, so we must filter it for you, so that you are not led astray. That is the attitude of a state. That is not the attitude open society. It's not the attitude of a free republic. And the Democrats are so guilty of this basic assumption. It's never discussed. It's always obscured by jargon. But this idea that they owe it to us to make sure that, we don't led astray by bad information is just so fundamentally insulting. And it's one of the things I'd say that
and let's just say that Nick Fuentes becomes president, okay? Everybody wonders about how this is, applicable in a situation where we think we have reasonable leaders. But imagine we get unreasonable leaders.
Yeah.
Do we want to hand them these concepts and these legal tools and these precedents? I don't.
It's outrageous, and it's like the fact that they spontaneously this campaign, this crusade against information, this fundamental mistrust of American citizens, and called themselves invoking, Charles de Gaulle, who fought the Nazis for the freedom of France, is just disgusting to me. So I mean, this is like it gets so under my skin. So Batya, I think you were too fair with.
But Batya, thank you for volunteering for that.
I'm obviously I'm on the same page as you guys morally, 100%. I think it's disgusting and deplorable and anti-democratic. I'm embarrassed for them that they did it. I just think that the legal system in the United States, the media, despite being so biased, I mean, everything sort of worked to expose it at the end of the day in a way that the guy who's in the firing range to the left of me and the guy to the right of me, they don't have those protections. But I agree with you guys that it's important that we be vigilant about them.
It barely worked. Imagine if Elon Musk hadn't bought Twitter. Imagine if he couldn't get it through.
One final point to echo Walter. I mean, we recall that in the early 2000s, there was a lot of tumult on the left, and I think justifiably so. And I wouldn't say just the left, because I remember Eli Lake writing about this in the New Republic, about the expansion of executive power under George W. Bush. And what ends up happening is that that power is used in an even more expansive way under Obama, and then it continues. The problem with these things is that, you have this type of, these types of attacks on free speech that exist in dictatorships in which, one party to the next, right? It's the one person to the next. It's the same, glob of people who have the same ideas. In a democracy, handing these powers to other people, if you see what's in Brazil, the crazy thing about Brazil is this judge, and I recommend people go and read an article about him that it's in the New York Times from 2022, where it's saying that this guy he's judge and executioner. He is deciding what is fake news, getting things taken offline. These rulings against Starlink, he's done on his own with no other judicial oversight. This kind of stuff is terrifying, particularly in Latin America, where, right in the neighborhood, there's people that have been doing that, like in Venezuela, that it's always a bad sign when this sort of thing happens.
Going after Starlink just tells the tale. Here's a completely independent company with different shareholders, and the guy's freezing its assets. It has nothing to do with Twitter. It only has an apex with Elon Musk. If this is some judgment about the hygiene of discourse in Brazil, then why stop Starlink?
Great point. All right, let's move on to the next topic. Before we do, though, I want to implore all of you, if you've been enjoying our coverage and if you're not yet a subscriber, please go to thefp.com and subscribe today. Just today, there's so much great stuff there. The topics that we're all talking about, you'll always find really, really important, great stuff at the Free Press. Please go subscribe. All right, on to our next topic. So